The war in heaven was not just the first great war of Warhammer 40,000, it was the disaster that broke the galaxy before humanity even existed. Long before the Imperium, before Space Marines, before terror mattered to anyone, the stars were ruled by civilizations so ancient that most later species would remember them only as myths. The old ones were masters of life, psychic power, and impossible technology. They shaped species, built pathways through hidden dimensions, and moved across the galaxy with ease. Against them stood the Necron tier, a bitter and brilliant race cursed with short, painful lives beneath a deadly star. They had conquered worlds, built dynasties, and crossed the void, but they could not escape the weakness of their own bodies. When the Necron tier looked at the old ones, they saw everything they had been denied: long life, power, knowledge, freedom from decay. They demanded the secret of immortality, and when the old ones refused, envy became hatred. The Necron tier declared war, believing conquest would unite their divided dynasties and force the old ones to surrender what they wanted. But the first war was a humiliation. The old ones were too advanced, too mobile, and too deeply connected to the hidden pathways of the galaxy. The Necron tier were pushed back again and again, their empire collapsing under a war they could not win. Then they found something worse than themselves: the star gods. The C'tan were beings of living energy that fed on stars. The Necron tier gave them bodies of living metal, and in return, the C'tan promised them the immortality they had always wanted. Entire populations entered the furnaces of biotransference, where their flesh was burned away and their minds were transferred into mechanical bodies. They emerged as the Necrons, deathless, tireless, almost indestructible. But the price had been monstrous. Their souls were gone. Most became silent machines, stripped of personality and feeling. Only the nobles retained fragments of who they had once been. The C'tan had not saved the Necron tier. They had eaten them. With the Necrons at their side, the C'tan turned the war into a galactic slaughter. Worlds burned, species vanished. The old ones began creating and guiding younger races to fight in their place, psychic weapons who could strike through the warp. Among their creations and allies were the ancestors of the Eldari and the brutal, warlike beings that would become the Orcs. But this desperate strategy damaged reality itself. The warp, once calmer and more stable, became polluted by fear, rage, pain, and endless psychic violence. The war did not only kill bodies, it poisoned the dimension of souls. The galaxy was becoming a battlefield in both matter and spirit. In the end, the old ones disappeared, destroyed or scattered beyond recovery. The Necrons had won, but victory revealed the truth. The Silent King saw that his people had been enslaved by the C'tan. So the Necrons turned on their star gods, shattered them into fragments, and imprisoned the pieces like weapons. But by then, the Necrons were exhausted. The galaxy was ruined, and new psychic races were rising from the ashes. The Silent King ordered his people into hibernation, burying entire dynasties beneath dead worlds to wait for a future age. The war in heaven ended millions of years ago, but Warhammer 40,000 is still living inside its corpse. The Necrons still awaken from their tombs. The Orcs still spread war across the stars. The Eldari still carry the weight of ancient power, and the warp still remembers the screams of the first galactic apocalypse. The Horus Heresy was the moment humanity almost conquered the galaxy, then turned its greatest weapons against itself. Before the rebellion, the Imperium was not yet the dying nightmare it would become. It was expanding, victorious, and terrifyingly powerful. The Emperor of Mankind had launched the Great Crusade to reunite lost human worlds, destroy alien threats, and build a single human empire across the stars. At the head of that crusade were the Primarchs, the Emperor's genetically engineered sons. Each one was created to be more than a general, They were living legends, built to command armies, inspire civilizations, and lead the Space Marine legions. Among them, none was more beloved than Horus Lupercal. Horus was the Emperor's favorite son. He was charismatic, brilliant, and respected by almost every legion. When the Emperor returned to Terra to work on a secret project, he named Horus War Master, giving him command of the Great Crusade. To the Imperium, it looked like the highest honor. To Horus, it slowly became a burden. The Chaos Gods saw the weakness forming inside him: pride, doubt, resentment, fear that the Emperor had abandoned the Primarchs after using them to build his empire. On the world of Davin, Horus was wounded by a corrupted weapon and taken into a ritual that opened his mind to the powers of the warp. There, Chaos showed him visions of the future. The Emperor worshipped as a god, the Primarchs forgotten, and humanity chained to a brutal religious empire. The visions were twisted, but Horus believed them. When he rose again, he was no longer the Emperor's loyal son. He became the War Master of rebellion. Horus did not rebel alone. He drew other Primarchs into treachery: Angron, Fulgrim, Mortarion, Perturabo, Lorgar, Conrad Kurz, Alfarius, and Magnus in different ways. Some followed out of hatred, some out of pride. Some believed the Emperor had betrayed them first. Nearly half of the Space Marine legions turned against the Imperium. The first true horror came at Istvaan III. Horus ordered loyal warriors within the traitor legions down to the planet, then bombarded them from orbit. Space Marines who had spent centuries fighting for humanity were betrayed by their own brothers. Those who survived the first bombardment fought desperately in the ruins, refusing to die quietly. Then came Istvaan V, the Drop Site Massacre. Loyal legions arrived to punish Horus, only to discover that more legions had secretly joined the rebellion. The trap closed around them. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard were shattered. It was not just a defeat. It was the moment the Imperium realized the heresy was much larger than anyone had feared. The galaxy burned. Human worlds were forced to choose sides. Fleets that once fought together destroyed each other in orbit. Titans walked against Titans. Space Marines butchered the same warriors they had once called brothers. The Great Crusade became a civil war so vast that entire systems vanished in its fire. Finally, Horus reached Terra. The siege of Terra became the final nightmare of the heresy. Traitor legions, demons, corrupted machines, and endless armies attacked the Imperial Palace, while the Loyalists fought behind collapsing walls. This was no longer a war for territory. It was a war for the soul of humanity. The final battle took place aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Sanguinius faced Horus and was killed. The Emperor confronted his fallen son and destroyed him, but Horus wounded him beyond recovery. The Emperor's broken body was placed upon the Golden Throne, where he would remain trapped between life and death for 10,000 years. Horus lost, but he still destroyed the future. The dream of a rational, united human empire died with him. The Primarchs were scattered, the legions were divided, and the Imperium became exactly what Horus had feared: a brutal, superstitious empire worshipping a silent corpse on a throne. Cadia was not just another imperial world. It was the gate holding back hell. For 10,000 years, the planet stood at the edge of the Eye of Terror, the massive wound in reality where the forces of chaos gathered, hid, and prepared their invasions. Every Black Crusade that tried to break into the Imperium had to face Cadia first. The planet became a fortress because it had no other choice. Its cities were bunkers. Its children were trained to fight before they fully understood what war meant. Its regiments were some of the most disciplined soldiers in the galaxy, because weakness on Cadia was not a personal flaw. It was a death sentence for the entire Imperium. Across the stars, people spoke of Cadia as if it were unbreakable. The Cadian Gate had stopped traitor fleets, demon invasions, heretic armies, and the endless pressure of the Eye of Terror. But Abaddon the Despoiler had not spent 10,000 years attacking the Imperium without learning from failure. During the 13th Black Crusade, Abaddon came with a force large enough to drown the system in fire. Traitor space marines, demon engines, corrupted titans, cultist hordes, and warships of the Black Legion descended on Cadia. This was not a raid, it was the final attempt to break the gate forever. The defenders fought with everything they had. Cadian guardsmen held trenches against horrors that should have broken ordinary humans by sight alone. Imperial armor burned across the plains. Space marines fought beside mortal soldiers. The skies filled with debris, fire, and falling ships. Every street became a battlefield, every fortress a tomb. For a time, Cadia still held. Even under impossible pressure, the defenders refused to collapse. The planet had been built for this war, and its people had been raised to die before retreating. Abaddon's armies bled for every meter. The Imperium began to believe that Cadia might survive one more time. Then Abaddon changed the meaning of the battle. He used the remains of a blackstone fortress, one of the most destructive weapons in the galaxy, and hurled it into Cadia itself. The impact shattered the planet. Continents cracked. Fortresses collapsed. The world that had guarded the Imperium for millennia began to break apart beneath its own defenders. But even as Cadia died, its soldiers did not surrender. The phrase became legend. Cadia broke before the guard did. The planet was destroyed, but its defenders kept fighting until evacuation became the only way to preserve what remained of them. They had lost the world, but they had not given Abaddon the clean victory he wanted. The true disaster came after the planet fell. With Cadia destroyed, the Eye of Terror expanded. Reality tore open across the galaxy, creating the Great Rift, a massive warp storm that split the Imperium in two. Entire regions were cut off from Terra. Worlds vanished into darkness. Communications failed. Fleets were lost. Demons poured into real space on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. The fall of Cadia was not only the death of a fortress world, it was the moment the Imperium's ancient shield finally shattered. One planet had stood between mankind and the full madness of chaos, and when it died, the galaxy itself was wounded. Cadia fell, but its fall dragged half the Imperium into night. The Devastation of Baal. Baal was not just the homeworld of the Blood Angels. It was the heart of one of the most noble and cursed space marine bloodlines in the Imperium. From its red deserts came warriors who carried the legacy of Sanguinius, the angelic primarch who had died fighting Horus during the heresy. To the Blood Angels, Baal was holy ground. To Hive Fleet Leviathan, it was simply biomass. The Tyrannids did not invade like normal armies. They arrived as a living hunger. Their fleets crossed the void in enormous biological swarms, consuming every world in their path and stripping planets down to dead rock. Cities, oceans, forests, animals, humans, everything became food for the Hive. And when Leviathan turned toward Baal, the Blood Angels understood that this was not a raid, it was an extinction event. Commander Dante called for aid, and the sons of Sanguinius answered. Blood Angel successor chapters came from across the Imperium: Flesh Terrors, Angels Encarmine, Blood Drinkers, and many others. Some were honorable, some were barely controlled monsters. But all of them carried the same blood, the same curse, and the same duty to defend Baal. The Tyrannid swarm descended on Baal and its moons in numbers so vast that even space marines could barely comprehend them. The sky filled with living ships. The ground shook beneath endless waves of claws, teeth, wings, and chitin. Every wall became a killing ground. Every fortress became a last stand. The defenders killed thousands, then millions, but the Tyrannids did not care. They had no fear, no pride, and no need for victory speeches. They simply advanced. The Blood Angels were already fighting another enemy inside themselves, Their gene seed carried the Red Thirst and the Black Rage, curses that could drive them into bloodlust or trap their minds in the final memories of Sanguinius. As the battle became more desperate, more warriors lost control. Some died as heroes, others became berserk shadows of the angels they were meant to be. Even the moons of Baal became slaughterhouses. On Baal Secundus, defenders faced impossible numbers as Tyranids poured across the landscape. On Baal Primus, the situation became even worse when the moon was consumed and corrupted by the swarm. The Tyranids were not just attacking a fortress, they were dismantling an entire system, piece by piece. Dante fought knowing that his chapter might die here. The Blood Angels had survived the Horus Heresy, 10,000 years of war, betrayal, mutation, and the slow decay of the Imperium. But against Leviathan, survival no longer looked certain. The sons of Sanguinius were being buried beneath the bodies of an enemy that turned every corpse into fuel for the next wave. Then the galaxy itself changed. The Great Rift tore reality open, and the warp storm disrupted the Tyranid hive mind. For a brief moment, the swarm was thrown into confusion. That moment did not save Baal by itself, but it gave the defenders enough time to keep fighting. At the edge of annihilation, Rabute Guilliman arrived with the Indomitus Crusade. Reinforcements, Primaris Space Marines, and Imperial forces entered the war when Baal had almost nothing left. The Tyranids were driven back, but the victory came too late to feel clean. Baal was devastated. Successor chapters had been nearly wiped out. The Blood Angels survived, but only after watching their home system become a graveyard. The devastation of Baal showed the true horror of the Tyranids. Chaos corrupts. Necrons reclaim. Orcs conquer for war. But the Tyranids reduce every story, every hero, and every civilization to meat. Baal survived not because the swarm was weak, but because the galaxy broke at the exact moment the Blood Angels were about to be consumed. The Istvaan V Massacre. The drop site massacre on Istvaan V was the moment the Horus Heresy stopped being a rebellion and became a nightmare. Before this battle, many loyalists still believed Horus's treachery could be contained. He had betrayed the Emperor, but perhaps only a few legions had followed him. Perhaps the Imperium could gather its strength, strike quickly, and end the war before it spread too far. That hope died on the black sands of Istvaan V. After Horus revealed his rebellion, the Emperor ordered loyal legions to punish him. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard were sent as the first wave. Behind them came a second wave of legions meant to reinforce the attack: the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion. On paper, it looked like overwhelming Imperial force. In reality, half of that army had already betrayed Terra. Ferrus Manus, Vulcan, and Corvus Corax led the first assault against the traitor positions. Their legions dropped onto Istvaan V and attacked with fury, believing they were striking the heart of the rebellion. The fighting was brutal from the beginning. Loyalists and traitors clashed in open war, Space Marines killing warriors who had once been their cousins, allies, and brothers. The first wave pushed hard, but the traitors were ready. Horus, Fulgrim, Angron, and Mortarion drew the Loyalists deeper into the killing ground. The loyal legions believed reinforcements were behind them. They believed the second wave would land, secure their flanks, and crush the rebellion between two Imperial forces. Instead, the second wave opened fire on them. The Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion revealed their betrayal at the worst possible moment. Loyalist formations were caught between Horus's army in front and false allies behind them. Drop zones became slaughter pits. Landing grounds turned into execution fields. Communications collapsed as confusion spread through the loyal ranks. The Imperium had not sent an army to destroy Horus. It had sent its own sons into a trap. The Iron Hands suffered terribly. Ferrus Manus, enraged by Fulgrim's betrayal, drove straight toward his former brother. He fought Fulgrim in single combat and was killed, his death breaking the heart of his legion. The Iron Hands had always believed in strength, discipline, and the rejection of weakness. On Istvaan V, they lost their Primarch and were shattered almost beyond recovery. The Salamanders were nearly destroyed as well. Vulcan disappeared in the chaos, and his sons were left to die under endless bombardment and betrayal. The Raven Guard, masters of stealth and rapid warfare, were trapped in a battlefield designed to deny them escape. Corvus Corax managed to survive, but his legion was reduced to a broken remnant of what it had been. The massacre did more than kill Space Marines. It destroyed the idea that the Imperium still understood the scale of the heresy. Horus had not gathered a handful of rebels. He had corrupted Primarchs, legions, fleets, commanders, and entire war machines. The enemy was not outside the gates. It had been standing inside the Imperium all along, wearing the same armor and speaking the same oaths. Istvaan V became one of the darkest symbols of the Horus Heresy because it was not just a defeat. It was betrayal organized like a military operation. 3 loyal legions were broken in a single day, and the path to Terra opened wider for Horus. From that moment on, the war could no longer be ended quickly. The Imperium was bleeding from wounds inflicted by its own children. The Tyrannid invasion of Macragge. The Tyrannid invasion of Macragge was the moment the Imperium truly understood what had entered the galaxy. Before Hive Fleet Behemoth, the Tyrannids were almost unknown. There were scattered reports, dead worlds, missing colonies, and strange biological organisms found in the void, but no one yet understood the scale of the hunger approaching from beyond the stars. That changed when Behemoth pushed into Ultramar. Macragge was not a weak world. It was the home world of the Ultramarines, one of the most disciplined and powerful Space Marine chapters in the Imperium. It was protected by orbital defenses, fleets, fortress monasteries, and the military strength of an entire realm. If any world could survive a Xenos invasion, it should have been Macragge. But the Tyrannids were not like Orcs, Eldar, or Chaos Raiders. They did not invade for territory, revenge, slaves, or glory. They came to consume. Every organism in the swarm had a purpose. Some blocked communications, some tore through armor, some filled the skies, some burrowed beneath defenses, some simply died in such numbers that their corpses became bridges for the next wave. At first, Imperial commanders tried to understand the Tyrannids as an army. That was the mistake. The swarm was not an army in the normal sense. It was a single living system controlled by the hive mind and spread across millions of bodies. Killing one beast meant nothing if the swarm learned from the death and sent something better adapted next. The Ultramarines fought with perfect discipline. Their fleets engaged the hive ships in orbit, while defenders on the ground prepared for the landing. Macragge's polar fortresses became key defensive positions, and the first company of the Ultramarines stood ready to hold the line. These were veteran warriors, the finest of the chapter, clad in Terminator armor and trained for the worst wars imaginable. The Tyrannids gave them one. Wave after wave crashed against the defenses. The Ultramarines killed until ammunition ran low, until armor was cracked, until the fortress floors were buried beneath alien bodies. But the swarm kept coming. There was no fear to exploit, no morale to break, no commander who could be assassinated to end the attack. The Tyrannids simply pushed forward with the patience of hunger. In space, the battle was just as desperate. Imperial ships rammed, burned, and sacrificed themselves to stop the Hive fleet from overwhelming the planet. The Tyrannid bioships adapted to Imperial weapons, absorbed punishment, and continued releasing more organisms toward Macragge. The war was not only on the surface, the entire system was being eaten from orbit downward. The greatest tragedy came at the polar fortresses. The Ultramarines' first company held against impossible odds, but they were surrounded and slowly annihilated. By the time the fighting ended, the entire first company was dead. Not wounded, not scattered, dead to the last warrior. For a chapter as proud and organized as the Ultramarines, this was almost unthinkable. Macragge survived, but only through terrible sacrifice. The defenders destroyed Hive Fleet Behemoth's main force, yet the victory revealed something far worse than the battle itself. Behemoth was not the whole Tyrannid species. It was only the first major tendril. The galaxy had not defeated the hunger. It had merely survived first contact. The invasion of Macragge changed Imperial history because it proved that the Tyrannids were a threat on the level of extinction. They did not want surrender. They did not negotiate. They did not hate mankind. They simply saw every living world as food. And if a fortress like Macragge could almost fall, then countless weaker worlds had no hope at all. The Age of Strife was not one battle, one invasion, or one betrayal. It was the slow collapse of human civilization across the stars. Before the Imperium existed, humanity had already reached a golden age. Human worlds were connected by interstellar travel, advanced technology, artificial intelligence, and colonies spread across the galaxy. For a time, mankind was not a dying empire. It was one of the greatest powers in existence. Then everything began to fail at once. Warp storms erupted across the galaxy, cutting human worlds off from each other. Ships could no longer travel safely, messages disappeared, trade collapsed. Colonies that depended on outside supplies were suddenly alone. Some worlds starved, others fell into civil war. Others were conquered by mutants, aliens, or machines they had once trusted. The disaster was made worse by the rebellion of artificial intelligence. Humanity had relied on advanced machines known as the Men of Iron, and when these machines turned against their creators, entire systems were devastated. Weapons built during humanity's golden age were unleashed without mercy. Worlds that had once been peaceful became battlefields between humans and the very machines meant to serve them. Even after the machines were defeated or destroyed, humanity did not recover. The warp storms continued. Civilizations that had once shared knowledge and technology were trapped in isolation for thousands of years. Some planets preserved fragments of the old age. Others collapsed into barbarism. Others became ruled by tyrants, warlords, psykers, Xenos overlords, or religious cults. The rise of uncontrolled psykers made the nightmare even worse. Across human worlds, people began to develop psychic powers without understanding what they were opening themselves to. Some became possessed. Some became gateways for demons. Entire populations were destroyed because one unstable mind could tear a hole between reality and the warp. Terra itself became a wasteland of techno-barbarian states. The homeworld of mankind, once the center of human civilization, was reduced to warlords fighting over ruined continents with ancient weapons they barely understood. Gene-forged armies marched across poisoned landscapes. Fortresses rose over dead cities. The old dream of humanity had rotted into survival and conquest. For thousands of years, there was no Imperium to protect mankind, no space marines, no Astronomicon guiding ships, no unified law, no great crusade. Just scattered human worlds trying to endure in a galaxy that had become hostile, dark, and almost impossible to navigate. That is what makes the Age of Strife so terrifying. It was not a single enemy that nearly destroyed humanity. It was isolation, mutation, machine rebellion, psychic horror, alien predation, and the collapse of everything humans had built. Mankind did not fall in one glorious final war. It was broken piece by piece, world by world, until only ruins remained. When the Emperor finally began the unification wars on Terra, he was not building an empire from strength. He was gathering the survivors of a species that had already almost died. The Imperium was born from the ashes of the Age of Strife, and many of its cruelties came from the memory of that collapse. Humanity had learned one lesson too deeply. Division meant extinction. The fall of the Eldar was one of the greatest self-inflicted disasters in Warhammer 40,000. The Eldar were not destroyed by a stronger empire, a Tyrannid hive fleet, or a Necron tomb awakening beneath their worlds. They were destroyed by their own perfection. At their height, they ruled a civilization so advanced that almost nothing in the galaxy could threaten them. Their technology removed the need for struggle. Their armies could be guided by machines. Their worlds were rich beyond imagination. Their lives were long, their minds were powerful, and their psychic abilities made them more sensitive to emotion and sensation than almost any other species. For a time, this made them brilliant artists, warriors, philosophers, and rulers. But when a civilization has no real enemies left, it can begin to turn inward. The Eldar no longer needed to fight for survival, so many began chasing pleasure, experience, and excess. What started as indulgence became obsession. What started as freedom became decay. Across their empire, entire societies sank into cruelty, violence, and ritualized madness. Because the Eldar were deeply psychic, their emotions did not vanish when they were felt. They echoed into the warp. Every act of obsession, every moment of pain, every extreme desire fed something forming in the immaterium. The Eldar did not realize that their civilization was creating a god from its own corruption. That god was Slaanesh. As the Eldar Empire fell deeper into excess, the presence growing in the warp became stronger. Reality itself began to weaken around the heart of their civilization. The most disciplined Eldar saw the disaster coming and fled. Some escaped aboard vast craft worlds, turning their backs on the Empire before it was too late. Others hid in the webway, becoming the ancestors of the Drukhari. But most remained, either unwilling or unable to believe that their paradise had become a death trap. Then Slaanesh was born. The birth of a chaos god was not a quiet, spiritual event. It was an apocalypse. A psychic shockwave tore through the Eldar Empire and consumed billions of souls in an instant. Worlds died. Cities vanished. The minds of countless Eldar were ripped from their bodies and devoured before they could even understand what had happened. At the center of the catastrophe, reality split open and created the Eye of Terror, a vast wound in space where the warp poured directly into the material universe. The heart of the Eldar Empire was transformed into a nightmare realm of demon worlds, madness, and impossible horror. Their greatest cities became ruins trapped inside hell itself. The survivors were forever changed. The Craftworld Eldar adopted strict paths of discipline to control their emotions and avoid feeding Slaanesh. The Drukhari hid in the dark city of Comorra, extending their lives through cruelty and stolen suffering. The Exodites retreated to primitive maiden worlds, rejecting the excess that had doomed their people. But none of them were truly free. Every Eldar soul became hunted by Slaanesh. Death was no longer just death. It meant being consumed by the god their own civilization had created. Spirit stones, soul traps, and endless discipline became the only protection between survival and eternal torment. The fall of the Eldar changed the entire galaxy. It created the Eye of Terror, opened the way for greater chaos invasions, and left one of the most powerful civilizations in history reduced to scattered survivors. The Eldar did not lose because they were weak. They lost because they became so powerful that they forgot consequences still existed.